and welcome to Media MD, your fortnightly Doof Network dose of media that you have somehow missed. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back this fortnight to talk about New Girl.
Mm-hmm.
So let's...
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, usually we start with a plot summary, but this is a sitcom. It's going to be more like a situational recap.
We'll probably touch on specific episodes as we go along. All you really need to know if you haven't seen this show is it's about a girl called Jess who gets cheated on by her boyfriend of like 5 or 6 years, I think, who she lives with, and so therefore must move out. And she moves out, wait for it, with 3 guys? What? So she gets new roommates, 3 men who are very manly and really need to learn a thing or two about women. And then it's just her and these 3 guys who are named Nick, Schmidt, and Coach in the pilot, and then Winston in the rest of the show. And also there's her best friend Cece, who's a model. And so, of course, 3 men with meeting a model, who knows what could happen. And that's the gist of the show.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm already picking up vibes from your analysis there. And I got to say, rewatching the quarter of season 1 that I rewatched, both before that prescription and for this, I had not accurately remembered how terrible the early show was with just handling gender, basically.
Yes. Let's talk about how much I watched. I watched the entire first season.
Yep.
And then earlier today, you were like to me, I rewatched some of this and it's got some flaws. Watch some later episodes. Yeah. So I watched season 4, episode 10 and season 4, episode 11 to kind of get a picture of how the later show develops. It's got 7 seasons, so it really went for a long time. So let me touch on my thesis that I carefully developed over the first season of this show, which is, so the intro to the show, like the title sequence, is Jess, who's played by Zooey Deschanel, who is a musician as well, kind of singing this song about how quirky she is, and the 3 other characters are kind of holding up the set pieces for her.
Mm-hmm. And
the intro gave me like big Crazy Ex-Girlfriend vibes, where it's kind of like meta and breaking the fourth wall about the fact that it's a TV show and all that stuff. And that's really the vibe that I got from this show. Is it feels like it desperately wants to be Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but just doesn't quite stick the landing. And the closer it gets to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the better it gets. And that's kind of my thesis for the show as a whole. When it is able to have these characters act like human beings and like discuss like their flaws and all that stuff, like it really flies. There's an episode where Jess has to interact with the girlfriend of Nick, and this girlfriend of Nick is this kind of like, she's a girl that's kind of defined herself by being like one of the guys kind of person. So she really likes sports and all that stuff, and she is afraid of getting in touch with her emotions because she thinks that makes her not appealing as a potential partner. Whereas Jess as a character is very quirky, very much kind of knows who she is in terms of her femininity, I suppose, but is not very mature in terms of dating and stuff like that. And so these 2 play off each other in really interesting ways and kind of force each other to confront the way that they are as women and the way that they've kind of evolved to be as women in this society that they live in. And it leads to some really interesting conversations. And then there's other episodes where, characters are just kind of being douchebags, like the male characters, especially Nick, who's the worst character, and I hate him so much.
See, that's so interesting to me, because I love Nick as this kind of... Like, I think, like, in a lot of ways, this is a show about a bunch of people helping each other to grow up, kind of way too late is the other part of the gimmick. Like, these are all people in their 30s who probably should have their shit together by now, but they all don't in various ways. And it's interesting how much I think my perception has been skewed by the later parts of the show where they're further along those journeys. Because, like, like going back and watching the first few episodes of season 1, I was like, God, Schmidt is just the fucking worst.
Yeah, the first few episodes are especially bad. Schmidt and Winston start really carrying the show from about episode 8 onwards. Because they seem to be more self-aware of their flaws. Schmidt is kind of a bit of a womanizer, but actually also is like, he loves cooking and cleaning and stuff like that. And he's made fun of for it by some of the other characters, but he seems very confident in, like, he is both kind of masculine or hyper-masculine sometimes, but also very comfortable with the fact that he likes to cook and clean and all this stuff. Yeah. And so he really kind of leads the way as, actually, you think he's going to be the biggest douchebag at the start, but then he almost immediately becomes the most mature character, and I quite like that pivot.
I think something that the show does more and more, and I think it doesn't land at the start because they're not open about this is where it's going, but like almost all of the overly masculine things that the guys are doing are usually coming from places of insecurity. Like the bits where they're playing up, like, oh, I'm such a buff dude or whatever. It's always coming from a place of some form of insecurity, and Schmidt's obviously comes from the fact that he used to be overweight, and that's something that sort of becomes part of his character, and then it's kind of like, okay, so he's usually being a douche, and it's because he's sort of like hasn't emotionally confronted stuff in his past, basically.
Yeah.
And I think Nick is probably the slowest burn in that regard because his kind of thing is that he's just kind of lazy.
He's a bad person, and I really dislike him. I really dislike, from the start of the show, it's setting up that Nick and Jess are meant to end up together. And I don't know if they do or not. They don't in season 1. But it kind of, there are a few beats where Jess will say something like, oh no, but I met you, Nick, and so now I'm kind of on the right path. And watching that, I'm just kind of like, what the fuck, Jess? Like, he has only made your life worse in the time that you've known him. You keep thinking that he's improved your life somehow, but really he's just again and again let you down. I don't know why. I just don't know why they put up with him. I really dislike him.
I don't know. That's interesting. I was really, I agree. Like he's defined in the first half of the show by just kind of being useless / lazy. And he kind of gets there, but I don't know. I always kind of found that kind of lovable. I mean, obviously at times it's a problem. That is the point. But a lot of the time I kind of found it like, that's just him. And sometimes it's funny. I don't know. I don't remember hating it as viscerally as you seem to, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. Maybe it's something about Nick just really rubbed me the wrong way, honestly. And maybe it was the fact that a large part of his season 1 storyline was him dating 18-year-old women at the college that he's like friends with the professor at. And it felt really grimy. And I don't remember that.
I mean, so for context, like you talked about what you watched. For context, I think I got about 5 or 6 episodes into season 1, half of that before the prescription, and then I just kind of noped over to season 3 and 4 because I was just finding season 1 difficult to re-get into, and I was like, have I? And I mean, part of that is that I love what the characters become, but I also think part of it is that I'm a different person to who I was 7 years ago, and I was just watching this and I was like, I do not like this early show anymore.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to be too harsh on it because I think the first 3 or 4 episodes are really the worst for this. And then most of the characters, except for Nick, really start to level out and it starts being much more competent as a show. I don't know what the deal is with Nick. Maybe it takes him a few seasons. That's fine.
I don't know. I think maybe there's just something between you and Nick that needs to be resolved.
But I actually really did, I don't want to just bag on the show because I actually really did quite find myself enjoying the non-Nick aspects of it as the show progressed. Schmidt and Cece, I think, are a highlight. They start forming a relationship that is very explicitly just sexual to start with, and then they both kind of start developing feelings for each other, and they're both adults that have kind of defined themselves by being romance is for kids, we're over it, we can live happy fulfilling lives having casual sex and we're both okay with it and all that stuff, and they're kind of they see themselves as very adult in that way, but then they can't really they can't really understand how to negotiate an actual serious relationship. which leads to some quite funny moments that are also like heartwarming.
I think Cece's used very well in the show because in season 1 she's almost more recurring than a main.
Yeah,
but she's used very well as she's a lot of the time kind of the straight man. Like she's the least crazy one. Like I think these 4 people who live together are the most insane. And Cece's often kind of played as the straight man. Is like, what the fuck are you guys on about? But then she also has her own quirks, and it's like the more they introduce of her, or the more time they spend with her, the more she kind of has her own personality, but she's not crazy enough to not be the straight man as well. And I think they walk that line quite well.
Yeah, she is either like support for Jess when Jess is having, her own dramas, or is playing off of Schmidt or one of the other characters who are doing some wacky schemes, and she always serves the group well in that sense. It's quite good. I want to touch on Jess next, because she is a hard character for me to wrap my head around. I don't know how I feel about her, because there are times when I think she's very interesting as a character. There was this one scene in like episode 3 or 4 that I really liked, where she was talking to Nick about how immature he was, and he said to her, "You can't even say the word penis." And she really struggles to say it because she kind of seems very like bad at being okay with intimacy. And I found it really interesting to have her kind of struggle with that. But then that kind of fades away, and then she kind of just bounces all over the place a bit. Like there's an episode, she has a relationship with a guy who's also a teacher at her school. His name is Genslinger. I can't remember, something like that. He's played by Justin Long. It's great. It's a great role. It's hilarious. This guy is basically a mirror image of her, like also very quirky in the same ways that she is. That relationship falls apart eventually, and then there's an episode 23 called Backslide, where Jess sleeps with him after she breaks up with a later boyfriend, and then he reveals to her that he has a girlfriend, and she's just accidentally become the other woman in this relationship.
Yeah.
And this plotline kind of ends with her helping him convince his girlfriend, whose name is Jen, that she should stay with him, and then he helps him propose to her, because he was planning to propose to her. And it's a real mess of a situation, and one that is played off like, yeah, I did it, I helped this guy reconcile with his girlfriend. But it's terrible, because he confesses to her that he cheated on her, and then immediately proposes to her, which is, and she says yes, which, like, okay, fine, like, of course, if you want to do that, that's fine, that's your decision. But in the same situation where you've just been, like, he's just said that he cheated on you with the girl that's standing right there, like, it's a real mess of a situation. And it's played off as Jess has just done this thing that she's happy with. And it's kind of like, Jess, you just did a bad thing, what you just did. It's really weird.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely took the longest to warm up to Jess the first time I went through the show. I would have summarized my old feelings for her as like she alternated between, I agree, she had some real good genuine moments as a character, but then often I felt like she was the least kind of three-dimensional of the characters. Like
sometimes, yes.
It felt like there were a lot of episodes where they would just lean on, hey, look, she's quirky and random.
She's doing a quirk, yeah. Totally.
Oh, look how random she is. And I think they got better with that going forward, but like I agree that there's like, you can tell that there's a really interesting character underneath, and they're just not using it as much in this first season.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It kind of... and maybe it is just a product of sitcoms being different 7 years ago than they are today. Like, if this
TV
yeah, exactly.
Totally different, yeah.
Like, if this show, instead of having a 24-episode season, had a 12-episode season, for example, I feel like they wouldn't just be like, okay, now let's do an episode where, whatever, it's some random thing that they need to deal with, and it's just some random quirky situation, and it doesn't really have any impact on anything. Because there are a few episodes like that, and that's fine, because that's what the format was in, 2008. But it kind of, I don't know, I feel like the show would have been better if there was more exploring of the characters and actually what their flaws were. And maybe that does come later. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does. I think maybe, not so, like I guess, I think the gold standard to compare this sort of thing to would be the first 3 seasons of Community, which I think managed to fit in 20-something episodes a season and kind of feel like everything was moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know enough about the production of this show. It could be interesting to look at who wrote each episode and just maybe see if it was sort of the way the writing room was structured. There was people who leaned towards certain characters over others, and that's why some characters fell flat in some episodes or whatever. This show definitely, I think at times suffered from the sort of 22 plus episodes in a season thing, as a lot of shows from back then did. Like, it's, these days you go back and watch a lot of these shows and you're kind of like, why are there so many episodes and so many of them are just nonsense?
Yeah.
And I mean, the CW still does that.
Oh, yeah, totally. I guess lastly we should touch on Winston, who I think is probably my second favourite character after Schmidt. Winston was pretty great. Winston and Schmidt, I think, really carried the show for me. They were just consistently hilarious.
So what was Winston's journey throughout season 1? Because at the start of season 1, he was very different to the Winston I remember from the latter half of the show.
So the interesting thing about Winston is he comes back. So he doesn't exist in the first episode. He comes back in episode 2. And episode 2 actually is a better pilot than episode 1, so I don't know why they even bothered to keep episode 1. Anyway, he comes back and he kind of is struggling to settle back into his life. I'd say the 2 things that happen to him in season 1 that kind of define his arc are, 1, he has to get a new job because he's been playing professional or semi-professional basketball in Latvia, I think, for 2 years. Yeah. And he's struggling to readjust to American life and having a job. He kind of is temping for a while, and then he becomes a nanny to a kid for a while. And then he becomes like an assistant on a sports radio program. And it leads to a few interesting situations, and it has him struggle with the concept of, well, who is he now that he's not the thing that he defined the first half of his life as being? So that's quite interesting to me. And then the second thing is he comes back and he tries to hook up with his regular booty call before he was away. And this girl has moved on in the 2 years that he's been gone. And he kind of realizes that he really has feelings for this girl and has to win her back. And so he goes through this process of struggling to reconcile who he used to be, this kind of like jock athlete who wasn't even really that good, but just was able to coast on that because he was good enough. And has to kind of redefine himself as, a modern man who is like more in touch with his emotions and more like sensitive and doesn't just call this girl to fuck every once in a while, but actually cares about her, which he finds that he does. So I think he and Schmidt, the reason I like them so much is they both quite quickly start towards their journey of not just being pieces of shit. So that's what I think made me okay with them a lot more. And when you're more okay with somebody, you obviously can laugh more at the jokes that they make and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. That was the thing. That was why I noped out of season 1 so quickly. Is I was like, I just wasn't laughing as much as I would have been because I didn't like any of them in that start of the show.
It makes it hard, doesn't it?
But I mean, I guess without, I don't know, I guess spoilers for later New Girl. I found Winston in season 1 very jarring because for the second half of the show, he's kind of defined by the fact that he owns a cat and he's very not traditionally masculine. He's
defined by the fact that he owns a cat.
Well, yeah, I mean,
what a definition for a character to have.
He becomes this kind of old cat lady, basically. Like that's sort of what he is in the second half of the show.
Okay,
and he's great. But it was just watching the start of season 1. And he was like this basketball jock, and I was like, have I hallucinated the last 4 seasons? Like, what the? It was a very, Winston is definitely the one who, in the start of season 1, I was like, that is not at all the character that I have been picturing.
Strange.
He's very different in the second half of the show, and a lot better. Did they introduce in season 1, like, Winston's pranks?
No.
Okay.
What? Is he defined by having a cat and being a prankster?
I mean, yeah, kind of.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so look, this is a 7-season long show, so obviously they have to play around with the format a bit.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I don't know, I could feel it getting better, and I could feel the characters growing on me as I watched the show. But having said that, it doesn't feel... I think my main problem with it is it made stabs towards saying things every now and again, but it never really felt like it wanted to deal with anything that strong. Like I compared it to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend at the start because that's what I felt like it wanted to be when I was watching it. It wanted to explore, like, it's a show about gender politics and gender relations, right? Like, that's really the thing that drives, I'd say 60% of the episodes, is, you know, like war, battle of the sexes kind of stuff, or you know, how men and women have different kinds of friendships, or all that stuff. And it made stabs towards making points about this that I actually found insightful on the occasion when it went far enough to kind of coalesce what it was saying into an actual point. But it felt like it shied away from doing that a lot as well, and it made me feel like I just wanted to watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which does the same thing but does it more brazenly, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that.
And the music is better in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yeah, the theme song for New Girl is always one of my least favorite parts.
I don't know. I liked it. There were parts of it that I really did like. I just felt like it just wasn't going far enough. It felt too couched, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that is just a symptom of what network TV was like, maybe a bit more back then. Like, I guess, because I'd compare it to Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I mean, this is, I guess, a bit of a tangent, but like the latest season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine kind of got way more statement-driven, I think, than it used to be.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I quite liked that as a bit of a change. I think like sometimes it maybe carried the show a bit too much, but overall I thought it was sort of a positive change. And I'd be interested now to jump back in like season 1 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and see. Like I kind of feel like it was just a goof show back then.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting kind of trend, right? Because it happened with The Good Wife as it turned into The Good Fight. It obviously became much more political.
Yes.
Orange is the New Black as well had a similar thing. And I really like it. I really like the politicization of these shows because it kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's more common for shows to actually want to say things. And I'm totally behind that. Like I can't not get behind that. It just feels much more, I don't know, authentic, you know?
Yeah, well, I think like TV, even 10 years ago is when it kind of started to change. But I think back in the day, TV was very much, it was just meant to be entertainment for the large part. Like most TV was just designed to be entertainment where, you know, Futurama used to joke about it, how at the end of the 30 minutes, everything had to be back to normal.
Yeah.
And that's really changed a lot, particularly in the last 5 years. And I think that's sort of why we're seeing the shift. And now people are actually telling stories, and part of that means that they actually have to have points to those stories.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder what the 7th season of New Girl would be like, and I kind of, maybe I'll watch a few episodes from it to see how it stacks up. I watched the 2 episodes from season 4, and it was really weird. Obviously, so much had happened. Coach was back. It was really strange.
Yeah, so the story with Coach is that they obviously had him in the pilot, and then I think the actor got a job. I think he was there was some show, people have been telling me to watch it. It's called Happy Endings, I think. And he got a lead role in that. So he sort of left, and, you know, between the pilot and the show going to series, he left. So they replaced him with Winston. And then obviously I think Happy Endings didn't last very long. And so they sort of just brought Coach back in.
Sure, why not?
And yeah, I don't know. It works out eventually, but Coach kind of re-goes through the whole thing where when they first bring him back in season 3, he's just a complete asshole again. That was one of the bits I jumped back to, and he came back in. I was like, oh, shut up. And then, eventually again he softens up, and they start to break through the kind of overly brutish facade he's putting up. But like it's a show that definitely kind of evolves the characters a fair bit, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe I will jump into it in season 7 and see how it goes. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there are nuggets of good characters in there, and just, especially Nick, and to a lesser extent Jess, they just didn't land it, you know?
Yeah, like, this is very much a show that's driven by those characters. So I can, like, if they're not clicking for you, then it's definitely not going to work. And like, watching this again, I think if I sat down to watch season 1 of this today, I would not have watched the rest of it like I did. Like, I think I must have been a very different person. back when I first popped this on, because I obviously fell in love with it, and I like what the show becomes, but it's got a pretty rocky start that I'd forgotten about.
I want to read out some lines from my notes, because I was taking notes as I watched the episodes, as I sometimes do for stuff like this. I'm going to start off with my notes for Season 1, Episode 18, Fancy Man Part 2. Here we go. Nick is a horrible character with no redeeming qualities. And then for the next episode, yeah, it was good. Non-eccentric episodes are the best. Then the next episode, it was okay. And then from the next episode, yeah, it would have been fine if Nick didn't exist. He's the worst.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah, there's an obvious theme here to my reaction to the show. Anyway.
So one thing we haven't quite talked about, that I think we probably should, is obviously the style of comedy.
Yeah.
Because I think I'd be interested to hear your opinion on how the jokes went for you.
Yeah.
Because there's obviously some very specific devices that they use a lot in this show.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned in the prescription a few things. You mentioned that they do the quick cutaways that feel kind of Family Guy-esque, I think you put it.
Yes.
I'd agree with that. I think that's a fair description. And those worked for me quite well. It really does help land a punchline for a joke. Somebody will make an offhand comment that's got a little bit of kind of intrigue to it, comedic intrigue, and then they'll really sell it with the quick cutaway. And I think you also mentioned the style of comedy feeling different, and I really felt this as well. Like, it wasn't that it felt like British, although it was kind of that. It just kind of felt different to a different American sitcom, right? It felt different to a standard American sitcom. Kind of, maybe I'd describe it as Community-esque or something like that. Just a bit.
So I think I compared it to Community, and I don't think I was very clear on this when I listened back to the prescription. Community to me has a very unique style of humor, and I think New Girl as well has a unique. I was meaning to compare them in the sense that not that their senses of humor are the same, but as in they both have a sense of humor that feels quite unique to the show.
Yeah, I think that's right. It does feel unique. It feels like they'll often go to places that are not really wild, but just kind of different, that are quite nice. Like, there's an episode where it's usually, it's got a plot and a B plot for most episodes. It's a fairly standard sitcom structure. There's an episode called Bells, which is season 1, episode something, I don't know, 7, I think. And I actually, in my notes, have written that I didn't like this episode, but there's some stuff to it that I did like. It's an episode where Jess is teaching like a group of kids, like troubled kids, how to play bells, like as an instrument, bells. And it turns out Winston's just a natural prodigy at this, and so he helps teach the kids. And it's just a weird plot. Like, it's just a really strange plot, and it's kind of got these elements of, like, the kids going on to play in the big championship or whatever, that they would see in a kind of underdog sportsy kind of movie, but it's about bells, and it just takes a few really weird, interesting turns. And I think that's a good example of some of the stuff that it did, that it actually did take some nice subversive steps. Like, there's a plotline where Jess starts dating a guy that's way older than her, and is a dad of one of the kids in her class. And there are a few interesting scenarios that this brings up, just because of things like the age difference, or the fact that she is teaching the daughter of the man that she is now dating. And it brings up some interesting, like, semi-subversive plots, but it doesn't really go all the way with them.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I guess, like, I think the other thing I think the show does that I'm struggling to quantify is I think there are a lot of, it's almost like characters talking under their breath as they finish, or in responses to things. Like, I don't know, there's just, like, there's often, like, some of the best jokes in the show are just, like, these sort of second halves to sentences that characters say quietly, or often a character will just say something completely weird and another character will just sort of call it out. Like, they'll say something about that. That's just not true.
Yeah.
And I think the delivery is what really sells that part of the humor for me. Like, I think the actors and actresses all do a great job of kind of just delivering these sort of underhanded lines.
Yeah, I actually think the actors are all doing relatively well. Even Jake Johnson, who plays Nick, I kind of was struggling to reconcile my thoughts about him. And then I realized he also plays old Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse.
Yes.
Which is basically like what it would be if Nick was Spider-Man. And it kind of really coalesced to me, like, actually, I really, really liked his performance in that movie. And he's playing the same character here. And so it kind of feels like he is actually capable at doing what he should be doing as an actor. And the thing that I dislike about Nick is just the situations that he finds himself in, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, when you really, really, really hate a character, that's often just as much a testament to the skill of the actor or actress as it
exactly.
is if you really, really love a character. If they can really just make you hate this person, they're probably doing something right.
A classic Joffrey, you know?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I guess that's all I have to say about the show. If rating it out of 10, I think I'm going to give it a 6.
Okay.
And it's because I wanted it to fly, but it just didn't get there for me. Like, there are things about what it was trying to do that I really liked, but it just didn't feel like it went far enough on them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, rewatching bits of season 1, I think that's a very fair statement.
Yeah. So Elliot, is it my turn to prescribe something this week?
Well, it would be. But we're doing something a bit different.
Good, because I don't have anything planned.
We're doing something a bit different today. We got a listener suggestion for an episode that neither of us had seen it, and it really piqued our interest. Yeah, so we haven't really thought out exactly how this is going to work. We're kind of winging it, which is really the ethos of this show in a nutshell.
It's on theme for this prescription as well.
Yes. So we had one of our patrons reach out to us, Tim_the_enchanter. That's definitely how that's meant to be read. And they have recommended Cabin Pressure to us.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just read out their little one paragraph description of it, which really enticed us to want to talk about on the show.
Yes.
So, MJN Air is a single-plane charter airline owned by the penny-pinching Caroline. She employs a safe pilot, Martin, played by Benedict Cumberbatch before he was big, as captain, and a good pilot, Douglas, whose respect for the rules is rather inconsistent, as co-pilot. Her common-sense devoid son, Arthur, played by John Finnemore, serves as the steward. The four main characters all ping off of each other brilliantly with generous lashings of sarcasm. So thanks, Tim, the Enchanter, for bringing this to our attention. And if you want to prescribe us something, just a quick note, you can do so by going to our website, Media MD Podcast. There's a little microphone symbol where you can record some audio and send it in, or send us an email. Yeah.
So obviously we got this email from Tim, and we both read that and was like, yeah, okay, this sounds good.
Totally.
I mean, you had me at Benedict Cumberbatch. I think this is a great concept for a sitcom as well, especially for a small cast of characters. To have them stuck on a plane all the time, I think that's a really good idea.
We should touch on the fact that this is a radio comedy, right? So there's no visuals here; it's all radio voices.
Yes.
I do like the premise because obviously they have guest stars that come in and out for episodes as well, playing presumably people who are like passengers or managing cargo or whoever, who knows what.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good formula to set up. I've never listened. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I wasn't fully aware that they had radio shows like this. I mean, obviously, so I've listened to podcasts over the last few years. I haven't listened to a full-on radio show, so I'll be
it's like some kind of pre-podcast.
Well, I'll be interested to see if there are any differences, or if it feels any different. I think probably not. But it is interesting. I've never listened to a radio show before, so I'm kind of keen to check it out.
Yeah, we should have rung the new media alarm. So the creator, John Finnemore, who also plays one of the main characters, I was kind of looking into him, and he seems like he's got some pretty good BBC comedy credentials. He was a writer on one of my favourite shows of all time, that Mitchell and Webb Look, which is a David Mitchell and Robert Webb sketch comedy. Those are the two main stars and creators of Peep Show as well. And I absolutely love that show. It's got some really great sketch comedy stuff. And this show seems to have some really good reviews and strong reception. So I'm really interested and excited to dive into it.
Yeah, me too. I think this is going to be really fun, and it's going to be exciting. Both of us jumping into it without any idea what we're getting into. Or,
Yeah.
Well, with a little bit of an idea.
If you want to follow along, you can find the episodes on Audible, if you have an Audible subscription. If you look around, you can find some people who have converted it into a podcast, which I found, which is less legit, but you can find stuff.
Yeah. And, if you want to get in touch with us as you're working your way through Cabin Pressure and let us know what you think of it, you can hit us up on Twitter. We are available at MediaMD Podcast.
Yes, you can leave us your comments either on Twitter or by emailing us, mediamdpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes. The other place we can usually be found, probably too often, is the Do For Media Discord.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exclusive to our patrons. So if you head on over to patreon.com/Do For Media, you can see all the other great perks you get. And one of those, obviously, is access to the Discord, where there's a whole Media MD channel, and you can talk about Cabin Pressure with us there.
Yeah, of course, you can just support us on Patreon just because you like the content. That would also be nice. And if you do like the content, there's other great content on the Doof Media Network, such as our other show that we do, Deep Impact, and a number of other great podcasts, on which you can find information about on doofmedia.com, which is the new home of Media MD, and also the new home of all of the clues for the Media MD ARG, where you can help us figure out just who is Dr. MD, and why are his friendships with the opposite gender so damn hard. Elliot, why don't you tell the listeners this fortnight's clue?
Goggles.
Goggles. And we'll see you next fortnight.